Welcome to Capitol Views. I'm Tim Bradner. We're here today with Commissioner Randy Hoffbeck, our Commissioner of Revenue, and thank you for joining us, Randy.
Thank you for having me.
Very difficult time to be here, to be Commissioner of Revenue, and it's a difficult time for the state of Alaska because of the budget shortfalls. How did we get into this situation? It seemed like the past 3 or 4 years we were just rolling in money, and suddenly, we're not. Suddenly we're facing huge deficits. Right. How did that happen?
Well, actually, I think if you look back at the history of revenue for the state, it has been fairly volatile over time. We've had several large declines in oil prices in the past, and really the last 3 or 4 years was kind of an anomaly in the history of the state that we had very steady oil prices for a long period of time. The issue really is that low oil price, we don't have control over low oil prices, and so we're in this situation because of oil price, and it's created quite a cash flow issue for the state. But one thing I think that's really critical to understand is the state has a cash flow issue, but they don't have a wealth issue associated with this. Last year, our investment incomes far surpassed the amount of revenue that we brought in from oil and gas production taxes. The pendulum for state dependence really is starting to move naturally from oil and gas to our investment side, which is something that was envisioned when the permanent fund was set up. And although we're not at the point to start spending permanent fund investments yet at this point in time, we certainly are seeing that those investments will be very much an anchor in the future.
And we're not speaking of spending of course, we're not speaking of spending the permanent fund itself because that's protected by the Constitution, but there is a possibility that maybe the investment earnings of the permanent fund, part of which are used for the dividend, but there's part that are not, and other investment income might somehow be part of an anchor for some other uses.
Absolutely, and that was envisioned when the permanent fund was set up. And like I said, we aren't there yet. But I think we can certainly see the writing on the wall with this oil price decline, and that the investment incomes are going to become more and more important moving forward.
Yeah, and of course the Governor Walker spoke of this during his budget message also. How big is the deficit? I mean, how bad off are we?
The current year is going to be about $3.5 billion, maybe a little bit more if the oil prices stay low through the end of the fiscal year. Next year, a similar amount of deficit, and then because we're forecasting the prices to stay low through next year as well. Our forecast right now shows a recovery to some extent in the following year, which would reduce the deficit. But if prices stay low, the deficit will stay at about $3.5 billion a year.
How much reserves do we have?
We can
right at hand, not including the permanent fund.
Yeah, we can weather the low prices until 2017, fiscal year 2017, 2018, somewhere in that area, assuming no substantial rebound in prices. If we get a rebound into the hundreds and 110 range, moving up with inflation, we could theoretically last about 10 years on our current reserves. So it all depends really upon how fast oil prices recover.
Now, is $110, what is that inflation adjusted? That would be equivalent to $90 today, wouldn't it? Or something like that?
The $90 back a few years, yeah, it would be equivalent. But we look at it in nominal dollars. We look at it in dollars a day and $110 a barrel versus what our projected budget would be, which is also in dollars of the day. So yes, it's not as outlandish as it might seem if you really look at inflation adjusted prices, but it's going to take some doing for oil prices to recover to 110.
And I guess also part of that's going to have to be some belt tightening in our state budget. We'll have to reduce budget this year, and what I've seen in projections the department has made is if we can reduce the budget to around $5.5 billion a year, down from about $6 billion at the current year, that we might be able to stretch out our reserves to 2023 or so.
Correct. And
I've
that's-
seen those kind of estimates.
And that is with that oil price recovery scenario in place. Yeah, the governor has put a target of $5.5 billion this year, which is about an 8%, 5 to 8% reduction in the agency budgets. But he's also put in a longer-term goal of a 25% reduction in agency budgets overall over the next 3 years. That would bring us down into the 4.5 range, I believe. I haven't actually run the numbers, but and that would then allow us to last even longer. But that's a tough number to get to. I mean, you can easily pare 5 or 8% out of a budget that's had robust revenues for multiple years by just consolidating some programs and paring down some duplications of efforts and just fine-tuning government. But when you start cutting deeper than that 10% level, you start bumping into the idea of what do you cut that's really more significant. But the governor said that that's our plan at this point in time, is that we're going to get our house in order first before we put any kind of revenue enhancements or any other kind of options on the table.
Well, one of the things about a situation like this is it's a time of opportunity because people are realize that we need to do something. So things can be discussed that we couldn't have discussed before.
Absolutely, and you started with this is a difficult time to be Commissioner of Revenue, and I actually think it's a challenging time, but I think it would be more difficult to have been Commissioner of Revenue at a time where you could see that our revenues and our expenditures were out of balance, but they weren't far enough out of balance to convince people there was a problem. Right now, it's obvious to everybody that there's issues that we need to deal with, and so it really does present opportunities that would be much more difficult to discuss if it wasn't quite so apparent. So this really is an opportunity to rethink government, rethink what government's place is within the state of Alaska, and try and adjust to have a longer-term fiscal stability.
So it's a time to really kind of rethink things. So
it is a time to rethink things.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. We're here with Commissioner Randy Hoffbeck, and thank you for joining us. I'm Tim Bradner. Thank you.